The media and the leftist talking heads had an epic meltdown over something the president said that was absolutely true. Hypocrisy and hatred run rampant on the left, and today we're going to examine their hatred of a specific group of people, and you may or may not be surprised at who that group might be. The Constitution is under attack from the very people who took an oath to uphold it, specifically the First and Second Amendments. A university is forced to shell out $44 million in damages after they ruined the reputation of a local business, and the Office of Special Counsel urges the president to fire Kellyanne Conway for Hatch Act violations. We'll expand on those and perhaps more topics if we have time. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. First off, let me just acknowledge that today is Father's Day, and I want to wish my dad a happy Father's Day. I was on his radio show on Friday. It's called The Awakening on Urban Family Talk, and we talked about some Second Amendment issues, but we'll get into that later, like I said in the intro. But one of the biggest reasons we're seeing the decline that we're witnessing in our society right now is a lack of fathers in the home. And since this is Father's Day, I think it's appropriate to touch on this real quick, even though it is a much broader topic that deserves a lot more time than what I'm about to give it, and we can do that at a later date. But I did want to just mention this real quick. One of the biggest lies among the plethora of lies that they tell us is that fathers are not necessary to raise children, and they're even trying to feminize Father's Day. I'm not going to talk about that right now because it's just too stupid. They're telling us that fathers are not necessary to raise children after the initial deposit, so to speak. And nothing could be further from the truth. But as I said, that's a whole other topic that we could get into, but we'll leave that for another day. So happy Father's Day, Dad. All right, let's do this.
Ding, ding.
This is never going to end, is it? The media and everyone else on the left went absolutely bananas when the president said something during his interview with George Stephanopoulos, or is it Snuffleupagus? I can't remember, about getting dirt on opponents.
And then the report comes out, and they didn't even say, they hardly even talked about it.
Should he have gone to the FBI when he got that email?
Okay, let's put yourself in a position. You're a congressman. Somebody comes up and says, hey, I have information on your opponent. Do you call the FBI? I don't think.
Coming from
I'll tell you
Russia,
what,
you do.
I've seen a lot of things over my life. I don't think in my whole life I've ever called the FBI. In my whole life. You don't call the FBI. You throw somebody out of your office, you do whatever you do.
Al Gore got a stolen briefing book. He called the FBI.
Well, that's different, a stolen briefing book. This isn't a stolen. This is somebody that said, we have information on your opponent. Oh, let me call the FBI. Give me a break. Life doesn't work that way.
The FBI director says that's what should happen.
The FBI director is wrong.
Your campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
You want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it. If I thought there was something wrong, I'd go maybe to the FBI if I thought there was something wrong. But when somebody comes up with Oppo research, right? They come up with Oppo research. Oh, let's call the FBI. The FBI doesn't have enough agents to take care of it. But you go and talk honestly to congressmen. They all do it. They always have. And that's the way it is. It's called Oppo research.
Now, when I first heard this, I didn't think it was going to blow up the way it did. But I recognize that there's always a danger in engaging in or entertaining the hypothetical. And George Stephanopoulos, whose background is not journalism, from what I understand, has gotten pretty good at interviewing because he laid a fairly decent trap for the president that he fell right into. Because before that soundbite, he was talking about Don Jr., suggesting that he could go to jail for doing something that every campaign has ever engaged in since the beginning of politics. Then he moved right into the foreign interference question after getting him in a somewhat emotional state. But the president said that he would look at the information if he was approached by a foreign entity. And the president used Norway as an example. But of course, Stephanopoulos brought Russia into the conversation. And of course, the media lost their minds.
That's how demented he is, whatever word we want to attach to him, that in front of the entire world, well, why wouldn't I? Wouldn't everyone? So you could almost say, is he evil, or is there just no moral compass?
All right. My reaction is not, oh, he's evil. My reaction to what happened the other night was, this is horrendous for our democracy. He is a national security threat. What he does is he manipulates the truth, and the results are evil. What happens in a dictatorship, what happens when evil forces step in is this: slowly chipping away at our values, slowly chipping away at our democracy. And that, whether he knows it or not, whether he's planning it or not, whether he gives a damn or not, that's what's happening.
I mean, it's wow. I mean, when you hear it, you can hardly believe after everything that's transpired that he's actually saying it.
He's so wacko. You'd think, last week it was go to the Mars and forget the moon. A month ago is go to the moon. He ought to go to the moon. Ralph Cramden ought to send him and not Audrey Meadows.
Wow. Lost their minds. But what did he actually say? He said he would look at it and let the FBI or DOJ know if something was wrong. So Trump looking at information or listening to someone from Norway or even Russia or China, if they approach him, is wrong. But the DNC and Hillary Clinton actually soliciting and paying for information gathered by foreign spies from hostile governments is just fine? Come on. These people are either blissfully unself-aware or just blatantly hypocritical. Don Jr. takes a meeting that actually yielded no actionable intel, but Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid for information that turned out to be false, but used that information to spur multiple-year investigations, hampering the president's ability to lead and the government's ability to actually get things done because they're too busy investigating and talking about impeachment and all this other nonsense. Don Jr. is threatened with jail time, yet everyone involved in the Spygate scandal not only has nothing to worry about, but getting dirt on your opponent from a foreign power is perfectly fine. Their hypocrisy knows no bounds.
It appears hypocrisy knows no bounds.
You're no hypocrite, Doc. I know some of y'all are going to get that. But not only are the left a bunch of hypocrites, but they hate children. I know that was a bit of a jarring segue, but I don't believe that statement was the least bit hyperbolic. I'm basing that on a few things, not the least of which is their stance on infanticide. Chelsea Handler is actually selling a shirt that says abortion AF. Come on, that's just sick. But that they're all in on infanticide is enough for me to assert that they hate children. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The left's ideology is steeped in hatred. But check this out. Here in the great state of Texas, and I found out after researching this that it's actually happening all across the country, but public libraries are introducing drag queen story time. Now, normally I'd say go research it yourself, but I did it for you, so do yourself a favor and just take my word for it. Now, I'm not saying that all drag queens are pedophiles, but I do bring it up to illustrate that introducing children to sexual themes is becoming mainstream. It started a long time ago when they were introducing the idea of homosexuality into kindergartens. This was happening back when I was in Massachusetts, up in Lexington, of all places, Lexington, Mass. And I'm sure by now it's spread all over that state. But once you introduce children to these sexually charged topics, it becomes less of a stretch to think that kids can engage in this type of activity. Now, while introducing kids to sex is becoming more and more acceptable, the efforts to normalize sex with children is not a new phenomenon. I posted on my social media a story back in, the story is from 2014. I posted it this past week about the pedophile information exchange over in the UK, and they're lobbying for the reduction of the age of consent to be between the ages of 12 and 16. I'll post a link to the story on my website, but it stems from a report by the National Council for Civil Liberties back in 1976, where they said that childhood sexual experiences willingly engaged in with an adult result in no identifiable damage. What? Now, this was back in 1976. So the effort was there, but the world apparently was not ready for it back then. And normal people still are not ready for it. Normal people will never be ready for it. So I guess that's the wrong word. But society hadn't degenerated enough, I guess, to accept such a thing, is probably a better way to put it. But in 1976, they were trying this. Now, fast forward to today, after the gay rights movement has been hijacked by the trans community and every other sexually deviant lifestyle, LGBTQAIP, 2S, MNOP, XYZ. And the left is proudly declaring that the future is queer. But wait, I thought you couldn't say queer. I can't keep up with these rules. I mean, the goalposts are moving so quickly that it's really difficult to keep up. But they have websites like Virtuous Pedophiles, which is a place where I can't even believe this. Minor attracted persons, and yes, that's how they are referring to themselves now. But it's a place where minor attracted persons can go and commiserate with each other and all this other nonsense. Now, statistically speaking, pedophiles, from what we can gather, are a very small portion of the population, a very small percentage. But they seem to be a very vocal percentage, and they want to be accepted. But we're going to talk about how they're going about gaining the acceptance that they seek after this quick break. Now, before the break, I mentioned drag queen story time and how they're engaging in that madness. But it doesn't end there, because there's actually a reality show about kids dressing up in drag kids, as they're called. And these kids, they're dressing them up in their drag garb, and they're taking them to gay bars dancing while perverts throw money at them like strippers, filming them twerking at pride parades, posing naked with men in photographs. I mean, all this sounds like child porn and child abuse to me. But not only that, in New Jersey, they're now requiring schools to teach LGBTQ history. This is not just proof that they're indoctrinating children with things that should be up to parents to teach their children or not teach their children, just like with sex education. But it's just more proof that they want the state to be the final arbiter of how we live our lives. Christian parents in New Jersey have to send their children to a public school and deal with that school teaching them and glorifying something that they would never teach or glorify in their own homes. But the state knows better, you see. But I don't mean to get off on a tangent about the socialist takeover, even though the indoctrination of kids into this stuff goes hand in hand with that. But if you look at these drag kids, there's nothing the least bit healthy about it. How can there possibly be? It's all about the pleasure that the adults can derive from the exploitation and abuse of these kids. And it is most definitely abuse. One of the most well-known of these kids goes by the name Desmond is Amazing. Oh my goodness. Seriously? Just... Anyway, he was the subject of a Good Morning America story a while back where they were praising him for being so brave, and his parents were being so open and supportive of his lifestyle. First of all, kids don't have lifestyles. Kids have what their parents give them and what they're allowed to do. But what is the drag lifestyle, quote unquote, anyway? Drag queens are men dressed and performing as overly sexualized women in bars and strip clubs. So how healthy or appropriate is that for a child? And this kid, Desmond, his parents allowed him to watch RuPaul's Drag Race when he was 2. And according to him, he knew at that point, when he saw that show, that that was what he wanted to do. Come on. He doesn't remember anything that specific from when he was 2. He may remember flashes of things because I have some memories that my mother actually confirmed from when I was around 2, but I got details wrong. And my earliest memory is from when I was about 3, and even that is aided by some pictures that I've seen. But he watched a show about men dressed as sexualized women when he was 2. Parents of the year right there, I tell you. But it's not just him. There's an actual documentary centered around these exploited and abused kids. And the adults are making money off of it. There's something very creepy and completely insidious about the whole thing. They're sexualizing these kids and making money off of it. If that does not demonstrate how much the left hates children, I don't know what can. But let's circle back to something I mentioned earlier about the efforts to lower the age of consent. Now, even though this started back in 1976 when we hadn't debauched ourselves enough, but the efforts still continue to this day. Although their goal is to abolish the age of consent altogether. And along with that push to abolish the age of consent, they're actually trying to designate pedophilia as a sexual orientation rather than a disorder. And now that they're mainstreaming this isn't your typical slippery slope argument where the consequences are unintended, and if they are foreseen, they're seen as highly unlikely. The consequences are actually the goal. Now, come on, did you ever think even 10 years ago that you would see a day when kids dressed in drag would be considered acceptable and be praised on a mainstream TV show? Nah, me either. All right, let's move on. Actually, you know what? Hang on a second. After that last segment, I wanted to go get a little refreshment. Templeton Rye, the good stuff. All right, moving on. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I was on my dad's radio show on Friday, as I said in the intro, and we talked about the shooting at the municipal building where 12 people were murdered in Virginia Beach. 12 people murdered and several others injured. And just like all of the other mass shootings, the municipal building where this occurred was a gun-free zone. It's been reported that at least one person considered arming herself that day because she was worried about someone who was going to be fired that day. And she expressed her concerns to her husband, who he encouraged her to carry, despite the fact that the city of Virginia Beach prohibits employees from carrying any weapon while working on city property unless authorized by a supervisor. Now, the policy also states that the prohibition against possession of a weapon applies even if a member has a permit to carry a concealed weapon. These rules make no sense. And this particular tragedy illustrates even more than others how they don't work. Because we have documented accounts of someone who was actively disarmed by this unconstitutional policy. 12 people died. Now, how many lives could have been saved if she had been allowed to carry or decided to defy the rules and carry anyway? Now, I'm not advocating for breaking the rules. I'm advocating for the abolition of gun-free zones. Because there's no denying that a good guy with a gun saves lives in those situations. Whether it's the Leos that respond to the call, or a barefoot civilian NRA instructor like Stephen Williford in Sutherland Springs, or any number of the other ones that you never hear about because good guys with guns stopping such tragedies don't fit the left's narrative. But the purpose of a gun-free zone is supposed to keep us safe. So how can it truly accomplish that goal if the only people who abide by gun-free zones are law-abiding citizens? Criminals and psychopaths couldn't care less about respecting gun-free zones. All they care about is inflicting as much damage as they can. So with all of the evidence showing that gun-free zones are an abject failure at keeping us safe, why do so many exist? Why do so many keep popping up? I was telling my dad on the show. My wife and I, we don't frequent a particular movie theater anymore because they put up a sign saying that you could not carry a concealed weapon in their establishment anymore. Oh well, lost my business. And it's tough because it was our favorite theater. It's the one that we like to go to the most. And oh well, sorry. Not sorry. But I asked the question, why do so many exist and why do they keep popping up? Because it's not really about safety. If it were about safety, gun-free zones would not exist. It's about control. It's always about control. It's always about power. Everything about their attempts to disarm us is about power and control. The last thing they want is an armed citizenry able to resist their attempts at taking power once they realize that they can't get it at the polls. Power is the goal. And gun-free zones are just one way that they are attempting to disarm us. And they also try and engage in propaganda and misinformation, because earlier this month, Ilhan Omar tweeted this: "Gun violence is an epidemic. Every day, on average, 500 people die from gun violence. How many more lives will we let gun violence claim? 500? Where did she get that number from?" But the thing is, there are people that actually believe this. 500 people a day is 180,000 people a year. 182,500 to be exact. Now, the last year for which we have statistics is 2017, where the total gun-related deaths that year was 39,773, for an average of 109 a day. Even PolitiFact, which is no bastion of conservative thought or two-way advocacy, rated that claim false. And let me just state for the record, even though this should be plainly obvious, but let me just state for the record that even 109 deaths is too many. I understand that. We all understand that. Now, despite the fact that this statistic is easily verifiable, Ilhan Omar and her camp doubled down and tried to defend the stat by saying that the number was used in the context of domestic legislation. What? That defense makes even less sense than the claim itself. The left likes to say that conservatives are Nazis and fascists. But they're the ones following the playbook of Joseph Goebbels, who said that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. And continuing on, he said, the lie can be maintained for only such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Wow. If that is not a perfect illustration of the political climate that we have in this country right now, especially coming from the left, I don't know what is, because that is exactly what the left is doing. When you have the banning and demonetization and total deplatforming of people like Steven Crowder, Laura Loomer, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, and even Alex Jones, who has his issues, to be sure, but he still has a right to say what he wants to say. Even my dad was banned from Twitter for something that was so completely ridiculous. And he'll never be back on Twitter because he's not going to apologize. And there was nothing to apologize for. And is there ever really? Louis Farrakhan's never apologized, and he has said some horrific things. And yet he's still allowed to spew his nonsense on these various platforms. Just ridiculous. And that was the lead into my next topic, but unfortunately, we are out of time. I didn't get a chance to talk about Oberlin College and the fact that they have to shell out $44 million, and I didn't get a chance to talk about Kellyanne Conway. I'll try to hit those on Twitter or Facebook and maybe even the website. I know it's been a long time since I posted anything up there besides the shows. It's having a full-time job. It's tough, but we'll figure something out. But again, to all the fathers out there that are holding it down and doing their best to raise upstanding men and women, happy Father's Day. And with that, I just want to thank you all for listening. We have started a group on the Facebook page that I want to start interacting with. It'll be a group like any other group. We'll be posting memes, and I'd love to get some discussions going and some debates going and things like that. It's up and running, but we haven't fully ramped it up yet. We'll be doing that in the coming week. But again, thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. Please subscribe. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast from. Subscribe, leave a review. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at The Liberty Cast on all three platforms. And like I mentioned, the group, please feel free to jump in there and get some discussions going. We'd love to hear from you. But until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.